episode of the Best Book Club. I'm your host, Nu Futura, and this is the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. On this episode, I'll be discussing Nerds Have Standards Too by EnigmaticSystematic. With me, I have Enigmatic. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, it's good to be back.
Yeah,
How are
30
you?
episodes later.
Yeah, way later than I thought I'd be back, but here we are.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. So, you first posted this on October 11th, 2022, and it has over 12,000 views. And it centers around a college student who's grown tired of having her time wasted on poor bullying attempts, taking matters into her own hands, while giving readers a glimpse into a wholly unique relationship and revealing more about herself than she most likely intended.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I guess just to get this out of the way right in the very beginning, I have to address the beginning, openly referring to Margaret's high school freshman days. It
Oh yeah.
unfortunately dampened the enjoyment as soon as I saw it. But besides that, the rest of the opening reads like a character backstory from a manga. And that might not be for everyone, but it's something I really like since I'm super into manga.
Well, there you go. The intro to that story was something that I toyed around with, mostly just because I was trying to figure out a way to sort of lay the foundations or sort of the groundwork for sort of her backstory in a concise way that wasn't going to be like its own story. You know what I mean? So
Right.
kind of skimmed through a lot of it, and it was sort of manga-esque. I
Yeah.
read a lot of manga too, so yeah, I totally see where you're coming from.
Oh, very nice. That's awesome. um,
Yep.
yeah, it really is kind of like this really uh, tightrope balancing act of like how do you make these characters feel real with a legitimate backstory without at once mentioning them being under 18. Like, how do you do it?
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't I don't think anybody's really found a good way to do it yet.
Yeah. No. That's one thing for me as well. I try not to. I know people talk about this all the time in the community. Try not to, include anything that has underage people, and that's why I didn't dive necessarily into specifics. I tried to keep it
Yeah,
vague, just to be like, yes, this is not a new thing, but at the same time, that's not what we're focused on, right?
yeah,
And so I agree. That was one of those things where I don't want to say it felt like a necessary evil, but I felt like it was something that it like almost was needed for the character to be like, yes,
yes,
this is not a new experience for her, but I don't want to dwell on any of the stuff that happened before she was, 18 and stuff like that. So I agree with you. I think in an ideal world, it would have been a little bit. I think I did a good job just kind of getting it out of the way as fast and as painlessly as
absolutely.
possible. So
Yeah,
but yeah, as for the other elements of it, it was an interesting thing because I've never really done something kind of like this before. Like you said, there's a very interesting relationship between the main character and like the primary person who bullies her,
mhm,
and so it was an interesting thing for me as well to kind of try and have this beginning part, like I said, sort of lay the foundations and the groundwork for everything else that's to come, so that it doesn't catch everybody off guard.
yeah,
It's sort of that's as introductions often are what they're trying to do. You're trying to
right,
draw people in, get them interested, get them invested, but without revealing or giving away too much of anything else. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had an extremely similar thing when I was writing Fortunate Events with my character Joe. Like, it felt necessary to have, to some extent, to have like just that little bit of younger uh,
mhm,
exploration, I suppose, of like their past. But it's still
right.
like, I guess it might be a question that we end up trying to figure out forever without ever coming up with a legitimate answers. How do we do it?
Right. Right. I mean, we're diving straight into the heavy stuff here, but like, so much of this fetish is, you know, as so many people have their origins in it whenever they're younger. And now, obviously,
Yeah.
that we're older and we have the full understanding of what it is that this is, it's like, okay, how do we approach this without being weird? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how do we like make this realistic without it being perverted? You know, and so
Exactly.
that's kind of like a it's a fine line to ride sometimes. But I think, if done appropriately, and I like to think I did this appropriately. I'm
Yes.
open to criticism about it, but if done appropriately, I think it provides a necessary element of realism in sort of, you know, touches base, so to speak, with some people who may have had those experiences, or for some people who it's like, oh yeah, this is around the time whenever I discovered,
Yeah.
my fetish for this and everything of that nature. But without that being the central part of the story. So
Right.
yeah, I agree. It's a very fine line, but
Yeah, and I think some people would say this entire fetish is perverted,
right,
but
yeah,
that's
well,
that's neither here nor there. Um,
yeah.
eh, and something that you touched upon just now is I really do love the expansion on the formulaic and frankly tired dynamic of bully and nerd. You essentially
Mhm.
flip it on its head in a very fun, unique way. And Arc Time similarly switched this dynamic up with What If Nerd Was Bully? And that's a story where the nerds are basically bullying the bullies into being more vicious. Though, besides these
Yeah.
two examples, this fresh take is completely unexplored. Like, I've never seen anybody really go after it like that.
Yeah, it was a thing that struck me in the moment. It kind of started as an offhanded comment that I had made to somebody else that am in contact with in this community. He and I were just, shooting shit back and forth. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to say that word?
Yes.
I probably should have clarified.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you're allowed to
Probably should have
curse.
clarified. Yeah, we were just shooting shit back and forth, and I made some joke about, some chick who is tired that everyone who bullies her is bad at it.
Hmm.
And she's kind of has this attitude of like, I'd rather it not happen, but if it's going to happen, do it right, go
Yeah.
all in on it. And everybody's just, sort of loosey goosey or only half assing it. And that just gets under her skin. And whenever I kind of initially just threw that idea out, we both kind of like had it when we're like, wow, that's actually not a bad idea for a story. And
Hmm.
then I kind of, kind of extrapolated on it. And then it became this full idea that I ended up writing down. So yeah, it was really fun to, you know, flip, like you said, sort of the bully nerd dynamic completely around, because so often, we see just the very, I don't want to use the word cookie cutter, but like a very staple, um, relationship,
A very boring
bully nerd.
relationship at this point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's been done so often that it's like, you know, there's I almost feel like I don't even want to touch it because it's been done so much at this point. And so
Exactly.
whenever I got into it, it was like, how can we make it interesting, unique, and everything? And then this whole, random idea popped out, and then it just kind of exploded into this thing, which is really cool. So,
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'd go so far as to say it's probably the most overdone trope or dynamic in really aspect of our community besides wedgies, like bully nerd
yeah,
dynamic. I would say that's the most done thing ever in the history of us.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like yeah, I guess in some ways you might almost feel obligated to do something different with it rather than just follow the
Oh, sure.
crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, breathe some fresh life into it, take it
Yeah.
in a new direction, make it your own, everything like that.
Hmm.
So, yeah, totally.
Now, despite all these classic bullying tactics like wedgies, nookies, like you
Hmm.
said, all of that stuff, they're
Hmm.
mostly present at a much younger age than high school and almost always end up being called childish. Why do you think that so many of us bring those to an older setting?
Um, hmm, give me a second to think on this. I think, well, that's a good question. I think the place that I would start with it is, one, obviously there's some sort of attraction to that, at the in this community. I think, wedgies kind of go hand in hand with a lot of other, what you would consider like schoolyard pranks and bullying tactics and stuff like that. I think like they all kind of get lumped together with one another.
Hmm.
And so there's a general attraction, sort of like, if you're attracted to one, you're going to at least be open to being attracted to the others. And so, for the same reasons that we would, be attracted to wedgies, why do we bring it into an older setting? Um, Probably, I think it's just a natural part of the natural extension of the fetish, I would say. And two, I think there's some level of comfort in like doing things that you used to do when you were a kid when you're a bit older, kind of
Hmm.
like that whole escape from being older type of thing. People who are, not kids anymore but still like to go to parks and stuff like that, you know what I mean, and play on like all
Yeah.
the playground equipment. I don't know if you've ever done that, but like that's always something that is like one of those types of things where it's like sort of returning to a time when things were simpler and easier and calmer and weren't as stressful. um and so I think that might be a part of it as well. I've never really thought about it, so I'm just kind of spitballing the first things that come
Yeah.
to my mind right now.
Hmm. Yeah.
um,
That's I especially that second point. I think that is. I think I could. I think that there's a lot of truth there. Um,
mhm,
this is something that like with all the stress and uh, whatever you call it of daily life,
mhm.
it can be so nice to just sort of go into something that I guess it's this is our uh, highest form of escapism, if you will, in the
Right.
community.
Right. No, I mean, it's something so childish and inconsequential that it doesn't feel like, it's not, a career move or, worrying about your education or worrying about your jobs or your money or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like it's like you said, sort of this escapism where we can just get away from all the scary stuff
Hmm.
of real
Yeah.
life and kind of return to a time whenever you're a kid and the worst thing you had to worry about was, getting bullied.
Right.
And that's not to say that like, serious bullying isn't an issue,
Of
but
course.
you get what I'm trying to get at, which is
Right.
like, you when you're older, all of that stuff seems so less big than it did whenever you were a kid. And so there's an appeal in I think the human, and we're going to get philosophical here for a second, but I think the human condition is sort of geared towards conflict. I think conflict
Hmm.
in some way is sort of unavoidable for us, and
Yeah.
I think people oftentimes, if there isn't any conflict, they will generate conflict themselves. Whether that's a good or bad thing is a different discussion.
Right.
But I think keeping it playful and keeping it, you know, uh, small on the sort of the larger scale. Um, and keeping it inconsequential, like I said, or sort of like not consequential at all. I think that is the like it's a way of, like you said, escaping from the seriousness of things while still sort of fulfilling that desire for there to be some sort of tension or conflict that can resolve itself one way or another.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, man. I'm this is the first time I've ever been asked this question or really thought about this, so this is kind of eye opening here. But
But
yeah,
you're
that's what I would.
everything that you're
Sorry.
saying is great. Like it rings so true to me. Like
Yeah.
especially
Well,
like
that's good. I'm glad I'm actually hitting something instead of just BSing my way through this.
I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that people just by nature have differing viewpoints, opinions on things. Um,
Hmm.
Nobody's brain is really wired the same way as the next person's, uh,
Right.
and like just even thinking about myself, like on the Aurora Protocol episode I did when I talked to Hans and Shadow.
Hmm.
Uh, I was disappointed by a lack of real tension or conflict between characters. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Is like we sort of maybe not all the time in the real world, but I think we seek out that conflict or tension in the media we consume.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. I mean, that's what makes, in my opinion, good. That's what separates good media from bad media is like, people want to see that tension and they want to see it resolved.
right.
That's, I mean, this goes all the way back to the Greeks, with writing plays. I mean, everywhere you look in
Yeah.
the earliest forms of like media or literature or some form of art and expression, it's always okay. What's wrong? and then how is that going to get solved? And sometimes it's, a happy ending, sometimes it's a horrible tragic ending, sometimes
Yeah.
it doesn't get solved, and that's in different issue all in itself. But
Hmm.
I think at the fundamental level, one thing people love to see in the art or the media that they consume, is conflict and resolution. So
Yeah, for sure.
mhm,
Although it's perhaps there wasn't if there wasn't a resolution more often than exists in media now, people wouldn't like
mhm,
it nearly as much. But I think because it's done pretty sparingly,
right,
uh, the few examples that you would think of off the top of your head, people like they sort of love it even more because of that, because it's done so little. Um,
right,
it's
right,
like just the right amount, where it kind of leaves you thinking about it, like
right. Yeah,
figuring out your
leaves
own
you
ending
wanting
and
more.
whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a writing exercise when I was in high school. I can't remember what year I did this in high school, but we read this short story, and it was about um some, if I remember correctly, it's basically some dude who was about to be thrown into like a gladiator pit with like lions or something. And then like
Yes,
he
I
had
know the
like
story.
he basically had like, yeah, you probably read this. I'm sure everyone's probably read this one. And it like ends on like a really weird cliffhanger type thing, and the assignment was we had to come up with our own,
Mm.
as we had to write it. And me being the little shit that I was back then was like, well, what if I just make it this entire thing, this entire ending that I write out is a dream that he has, and he wakes up, and he wakes up on the morning that he's supposed to go into the arena. So there's still no ending, right? It's still
Oh,
we're brought back right to the moment where the story actually left off. And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. My English teacher was not that impressed with me. But that's okay.
I
So
mean, I hey, that was just one person, and like they're put in charge of you, but they don't really have any say at the end of the day over what's good and
no,
what's
right,
not.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that sounds like I would love to read. That sounds so interesting.
man, yeah, that was it was a fun one. But I try not to do that too much because I think I was like my English teacher disliked it so much. I was like,
Uh-huh.
maybe we should just like resolve things instead
Yeah.
of just leaving it open ended. But I agree with you. I think if done
Yeah.
right and done in moderation, it can be really impactful. Um,
Absolutely.
because I think that you sort of deny the best part of a story, which is the resolution, right? It's like, okay, how does everything end? And if you sort of deprive that, you can create a lot of emotions in people that you don't get with, a happy or even a sad ending.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the experience is continuing if you leave it open ended.
exactly.
So going off of this train of thought, I'm curious how you would answer this then. Like how do you keep the stakes genuine?
Um, man, I think. Yeah, no, I think the way to keep stakes genuine, keep the tension high, and keep it feeling like there's some real problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, like it's not just some invented problem for this and
Right,
it just goes away and
right.
nothing happens.
I think that ultimately comes down to um, good characterization is what I would start with. I would
Mm.
start with, I think if you make the people in the story feel real and you make them feel genuine, then their problems are going to feel real and their problems will feel genuine. And I think this is, I'm trying to find the way to word this here.
Hmm.
I think it's one of those things where you think to yourself, okay, if these characters feel, cartoony or 2D-ish or very, fake, then that kind of mars everything that you see about them, right? Because
Yeah.
you're experiencing the story through their perspective for the most part, right? Like for example, in the story that we were talking about, everything is through Margaret's perspective, and so if that character feels fake, then everything that they are experiencing likewise feels fake because you can only take what they are giving you, right?
Hmm.
And so I think if you create real characters and you create characters that are intriguing or at least to some degree pull you in, then even if it's, even though it's a story and you kind of understand that it's a story, you're now suddenly invested, right? I think
Yeah.
it's, you have to sort of play on the fact that humans are sort of sympathetic creatures and we have a tendency to sort of put ourselves into other people's shoes. So when you create this drama and this tension, um, if done right, the person reading it feels the drama and the tension more than the characters would, right? Because the characters aren't
Yeah.
real, but the reader is, and so that becomes like a very cool thing that you can do. And that I tried to do, just in general, I tried to do that. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is the relationship between characters. That's where I think you're going to get the best. hmm, I don't know if I'd say the best drama is necessarily between two characters, but I think it could be, in my opinion, the best
Mm.
drama that you get between two characters. And so the way that they interact with each other, the way that they engage with each other, how they view the tension, because if there's tension between two characters, you're going to have two different points of view on that tension, right?
Right.
Um, I think the way to do it is, I mean, I don't want to just be that guy to go say like go back to the fundamentals of like the story pyramid arc or whatever that everybody learns about with your exposition and your rising action, your climax, your falling action. But I think there's a reason we do all that,
Mm-hmm.
which is that you just keep building, 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 and then once everything resolves itself, you let it resolve. Don't try and you know. There we go. That's what I'm trying to get. Okay, sorry. We're
Don't.
hitting it. I'm getting here now. I'm getting here now. So you keep it building. You keep everything real. You keep it building. But then once your tension spikes, let it spike. Right. Don't try and have multiple spikes throughout the story. I would think, because then that makes everything feel sort of contrite, right? Like if you have like a
Yeah.
climax and then instead of letting it fall, you're like, oh, what if we go bigger? And then what if we go bigger? And then what if we go bigger? Then every climax in your story before then feels not important, right? It,
Yeah.
it, it feels like that's like, oh, it's either a fake out or something like that. So like when your tension peaks, let it peak, embrace it, and then let it fall, so that you have on both sides of that peak things leading up to it and the resolution afterwards. You can really see, okay, this was actually what we were here for, and this is how it sort of resolved itself. I think that's what I'm
Absolutely.
trying to get at. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that
Yeah.
answer.
People will pick up pretty
Right,
immediately if you're artificially extending the stakes, or
right,
like, there's not really a reason to keep going with it. Like, yeah,
right.
readers are smart. They'll pick up on it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So you talk to some degree about where the idea came from for a nerd wanting a
hmm
higher form of bullying, but were there any other factors that went into your conceptualization of this idea? I really do
Mm.
love it, by the way.
Thank you, thank you. I honestly don't think there was anything else that went into this. I think, um, with this fetish in particular, you're bound to sort of have. I think we briefly talked about sort of like correlations, or not correlation, whatever it's like, sort of connected, um, things that you're attracted to other than it. So a lot of people that are into the wedgie fetish like bullying is sort of a fetish or something of that, and all these other things that kind of go with it. Maybe you're not one of those people, not you specifically, just you in general.
Right.
You plural, and that's fine. And so, but I know that that's something that's very commonly attached to it, right? People
Hmm.
talking about, nerds that like it when they get bullied, or not necessarily the wedges themselves, but the fact the fact that they're being bullied and stuff like that, or people have crushes on their bullies, stuff like that. That kind of played into this. I didn't want this to go too in depth into that, and so that's why I think the relationship between, Margaret and Ian is like she doesn't necessarily like him, but
Hmm.
she sort of sees him as a means to an end, right? It's like this is
Right.
something that I desire. This is the only person that could give me that. And then we never get to see it from his perspective, and that's fine. I never really thought about the thing, how he views all of this,
Hmm.
but that's okay. Um, so yeah, I would say in terms of like what played into it is mostly just this little blurb, this kind of accidental thing that I thought up of, some cheeky, like some cheeky sort of,
Hmm.
stuffy collared girl who's like, you know what, if you're gonna do it, make sure you do it right, kind of thing, kind of bratty attitude about it, and so that
Yeah.
was pretty much the biggest thing that motivated it. And
Okay.
yeah.
And the one thing you just said, like, only have really only having Margaret's perspective on it.
Mhm.
It's, I guess, when you brought that up, I was like, you know what? I actually am curious about like Ian's perspective on it. So
Mhm.
I might even give just a little bit more engagement with the story. Like, if you have one, people want, if you give them a taste. I guess if you give people a, I guess the saying wouldn't quite work fully, but like the old saying, like, give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Like,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
give them a taste, they'll want a mile, I suppose, in this. Um,
Yeah. They'll want the other side of the
yeah,
coin. Yeah. Um yeah, I understand that. I just it never really occurred to me to think about this from his perspective. I think
yeah,
this was supposed to be more type of an introspective dive into her idea about this whole thing.
yeah,
And I got really invested into it because, like you mentioned, I've never really written anything with this dynamic before, so it was a whole new sort of characterization to explore, which was really exciting for me. I think I wrote this thing in like 2 or 3 days. Like I really sat down and just hammered this one out. Usually, it takes me a while to write stuff, as anyone who sort of keeps up with me on the site knows. I'm a very infrequent poster. But this one, I hammered out very very quickly and had a lot of fun writing it because it was such a new experience for me. I was like, well, this is a perspective I've never really explored. So how do we? What can we do? And that's always exciting, like from a writer's perspective, right?
oh
Being
yeah,
able to do new things. So I never really thought about it from Ian's perspective. Mostly just because I was just so excited to explore it from Margaret's perspective that it never even occurred to me
yeah.
to think about it from his. So,
I think it works that you don't explain his perspective, because then you get Margaret's and you see what she's thinking, and you're like, huh, I wonder what Ian is thinking, and so then
right.
you're giving that you're giving that away to the readers. You're letting them think of it of how they'd like to. Um, like, I think you give enough from Ian for people to get sort of a basic understanding of, well, maybe he'll think like this, maybe he thinks about it like this.
Sure.
And especially given the length of the piece, it would be, I think, jumping around way too much if it was more than just Margaret's perspective.
Agreed. Agreed. Um, I thought about including some more dialogue between them to kind of try and give some more clues there, but I think I like the fact that there's very limited dialogue between them in the end. So I agree. I think with how shorter this one is in comparison to some of the stuff that I've written, which can get fairly lengthy. I think keeping it unilateral in its perspective and in its focus was the right move. So
For sure. Absolutely. And it's, I don't remember what I was going to say. That's whatever. The idea for it feels like a massive expansion on the thing we talked about when you were on before, about the phrase "my wedgie" and the acceptance
hmm
that that phrase conveys. Like, this
yep,
is like taking that and, like, foot to the floor, pedal to the floor, uh,
yep,
turn it up to
running with it.
11. This
Yep.
is like going all in, which is
hmm
fantastic.
Yeah,
It's so great.
yeah. I don't have much to say on that. I see what you're saying. I totally agree with that. It was like I said, it was a lot of fun to write.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't have. You could tell. When you're writing stuff, you could definitely tell when kind of something is going to be. I don't want to gas myself up by saying this is a good one, but obviously people like it a lot. But
Yeah.
you can kind of tell when you're writing something and you're like, this is good. You know what I mean? And I
Uh
think one of
huh.
the reasons you could tell is how enthusiastic you as a writer are about it. I think
Yeah.
usually the more enthusiastic you are about something, the better it translates to other people because they can sense that enthusiasm in the writing. Um,
thousand
and so
percent.
I was really excited about this one, and I think it translated super well. And I think the whole thing that you mentioned about sort of this ownership over your status as a nerd, which is like a
Yeah.
weird kind of like analysis to approach it from. But I think, yeah, that's kind of where Mary is coming from in the story. It's whether it's begrudging or not. I think I purposefully left up to readers' interpretation. Like, is she excited that she's sort of, you know, owning this whole thing, or is this more of a I'm doing it just for the sake of convenience, right? Because it's one of
Hmm.
those things where she talked about, wasting her time is such a big deal, and she's just like, screw it, get it out of the way, let's do this and get it over with type of situation. Um, but yeah, that sort of ownership of your status. I tried to lean kind of heavy into that, where she doesn't really have any complaints about it, insofar as it, meets her standards. So,
Hmm. Yeah, and
hence the title. So,
I think it primarily stems from BDSM,
oh yeah,
especially
absolutely,
the
yeah,
uh, DNS and SNM aspects of it,
hmm yeah,
like where there's clearly defined roles. People are they want to be in these roles, and like it's just
hmm
fantastic. I I guess there's been a little bit of conversation around like wedgies in relation to BDSM, but I guess I'd
hmm
like to do a whole episode on it because there's just, I feel like there's so much to go into there.
oh yeah. I mean, they're so obviously linked together. I mean, people have explored it in other stories, or just straight up talked about it, or written analysis about it. So I mean, even people outside of the community, um, me and a couple other people that talk, excuse me, through this community, and sort of share this fetish with
Hmm.
one another, we talk about it all the time. People who have no obvious, sort of, I guess, allegiance or sort of like identity within the wedgie community, are starting to bring them into the BDSM talks, into other conversations, into just all these other things that are happening. Um, that it's so obviously linked together, which is an
Yeah,
interesting thing to explore and look at, where
for
you're like,
sure.
okay, how many of these people are eventually going to end up with the fetish, or is this
Yeah,
just a fad, or is it like a permanent movement? Kind of um, how are we going about that? So,
yeah, for sure. And really, I'm honestly astonished at the fact that nobody else thought to use the premise of a nerd going out of their way to receive good bullying, even going to the bully's home. Though, if there are
yeah,
stories like that I'm just not aware of, please send them my way. There
yeah, me too.
is something somewhat similar in Saseta's novel I Could Change Her, but that focuses on the regular bully nerd dynamic, and this is
Mm.
the complete opposite. So, yeah. Now, I wish the atomic that Ian gives Margaret had been expanded at all.
hmm
It was a blink
Yeah.
and you'll miss it moment, which honestly, when I think about it, kind of actually works in the story's favor, since I guess in a metaphorical way, since you're not only flipping the expectation of the bully nerd dynamic, but with that wedgie, you're also subverting the expectation of what an atomic should be. I'd
hmm
still rather have a more drawn out one, but thinking about it in this way does make it more enjoyable.
You'll get it one day. One day I'll write a wedgie scene that you actually approve of. Until then, yeah, I thought about that as well, but I think at this point where the actual like wedgie happens in the story, I knew I wanted it to end soon,
Hmm.
and I knew I wanted, things to continually be really about her, and this is really more. As we've kind of briefly touched about, this is more of like a dive into her psyche about the whole thing, and her
Yeah.
relationship to her role, in Ian's role, and sort of the social hierarchy and everything around there. And so, in a weird way, this is a story where the actual like physical bullying and wedgies and everything almost take a backseat to her perception about everything, right?
Hmm.
Like, that's kind of what I was trying to go for, which is, what does she think about this? That's more important to me for the sake of this story.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to put in the foreground, was what are her thoughts, what are her emotions, what does she think about this? But obviously, we're all here for this stuff, so you still include it in there.
Of
Um,
course.
and I think part of the reason I also tried to make it go so fast was because I was trying to sort of create this sense of, even she's not aware of how fast this is going. She's so lost in her thoughts that she's kind of zoned out, and it's only when it happens and like it's the atomic is completed that she's like, oh yeah, this is also happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, that was kind of an idea that I was trying to go for as well. Um, but yeah, it was an interesting thing because in some of my stuff, I'll write very detailed descriptions of the wedgie occurring, and then in stuff like this, it's just like literally, like you said, blink and you miss it, and it's already done.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, just like knowing, having read some of your other stories as well, it's very clear it's an intentional thing. It's not like you just
hmm
didn't think to write out or to expand it. It was very intentional. You did it on purpose. So, um, I guess trying to understand where you came from on it
hmm
helped me to understand why that was there. I
yep,
so in some ways, Margaret feels like a younger version of Dr. Bradshaw from Wasteland
yeah,
Variance during Atomic Wedgies: A Study. Like
hmm
Bradshaw is the woman Margaret would grow up to become. I don't
yeah,
think there's every parallel in the world can be made between them, but there's some pretty strong ones.
sure, yeah, I could see it definitely. Um, Spoilers, she's not. Hate to burst anyone's bubble on that, but yeah, no, I totally see it. Yeah, I think there's a couple of different, I guess, sort of archetypes you could look at for the characters that we see in these stories a lot. And I think some people, you have the person who gets the wedgie and does not like it. You get have the person who gets the wedgie and is sort of indifferent towards it, and then you get the person who gets the wedgie and enjoys it for one reason or another, right? It doesn't necessarily
Right.
have to be a sexual enjoyment. Maybe they just think it's fun. Maybe they whatever it might be, right? And so I have a preference towards leaning towards that third one, right? The person who gets the wedgie and enjoys it.
Of course.
But I've been trying to expand kind of the means by which they enjoy it, right? So it's not just a sexual preference. It's not just something like that, even if that's kind of the primary one that I've explored. So for this, it was an interesting one because I don't think Margaret is into them. Like she doesn't think they feel good. She's not into them
Hmm.
sexually, but there's something that's obviously satisfying and gratifying about them.
Yeah.
So, and for Dr. Bradshaw and the other story that we talked about a while ago, um, there is obviously a very clear sexual element to it, but there's also sort of this, academic fulfillment of, doing the research and the testing and all that sorts of stuff. So, um, interesting comparisons between the two. I would be interested to hear like some of the comparisons and parallels that you see between the two of them.
I mean, I guess like the base one is like they both get some kind of satisfaction out of
Right.
wedgies,
Sure.
and I guess being dominated to some degree, although
hmm
the Bradshaw's sort of dominating herself. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
no, I guess I have to write them down to give you
No,
the
you're fine.
actual list, but yeah, there's
Totally fine.
I guess also like sort of this one wasn't really stated eh, for Margaret, but I kind of got the feeling of it is like Dr. Bradshaw is a scientist and she's uh, an educator, so her mind is going to be very efficient and she's going to be trying to get to the best way of doing things as possible. Um,
Sure.
and that's essentially the exact same thing that Margaret's trying to do. Like she doesn't want any half-ass stuff. She wants it either all or nothing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I totally see that as well. Yeah, no, that's a really good comparison that I hadn't thought about for them, but I like that. So,
Now, I've referenced this manga a few times in previous episodes, and you might have heard me talk about it before, Enigmatic. And I highly, highly, highly recommend it for anybody, especially in this community because it works so well. Like it goes hand in hand. The relationship between Margaret and Ian feels extremely reminiscent of the initially softcore BDSM relationship between Nana and Kaoru in the manga Nana and Kaoru, especially the fact that Margaret doesn't get any satisfaction from the weak bullying she normally experiences, like how Nana doesn't get any satisfaction from doing what they call breathers with anyone but Kaoru.
I'll be honest, I have not read this one, so I'm kind of
You gotta.
interested in what it is, but
It's
I'll definitely give it a look. So,
it's some of the most amazing character work I've ever seen in any
and what's this one called?
Nana and Kaoru.
Nana and Kaoru. Okay, I will definitely be sure to give it a look then. So,
It's also the highest quality uh, volumes of manga I've ever had in my life. Like they're just so much better than Shonen Jump and all that. So it's such a great
okay,
series. Such a
very
good
good,
series.
very
Um,
good. All right, I'll definitely give it a read.
and it's especially apparent to me when Ian bound Margaret with duct tape and like the little exchange they had, the back and forth of like uh, Ian sort of teasing her and then
Hmm.
Margaret firing back a little bit, even though it's all a play, and they
Right.
both know they know what's going on. They know why they're here.
Oh
At
yeah,
least Margaret fully
definitely.
knows. We don't fully know if Ian fully understands uh, Margaret and like why her thoughts behind their relationship. But yeah,
Right. Yeah. No, I yeah. Playfulness was definitely something I was trying to keep at the forefront of this. Like I personally am not a fan of the super like hardcore like masochism side of things where it's just one person just being ruthlessly cruel to the other person. So I
hmm
tried to keep it kind of playful. And I like to think, without expanding too much on it, I like to think that Ian knows to some degree that this is a playful exchange.
yeah,
That both are, well, obviously both are, desiring this. She's coming to him, and he's not being like, "You're weird. Why are you doing this?" You know what I mean? Like he's
yeah,
like, "Okay, if this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing." So to some degree, he understands what's going on, and is obviously reciprocating it. So yeah, that
yeah,
one, I think that lends itself to kind of a playful. Some of the playful dialogue that we see between them, which is very limited. I think there's only like 3 or 4 lines of like actual dialogue between them,
yeah.
but
Which is such a far cry from waistband variants.
yeah, like I said, I like to explore a lot of different. I like to keep
Yeah.
things fresh, and so and I've talked about this many times where I've tried to do a story that had no dialogue. Or sorry, no, a story that was only
hmm
dialogue. Don't know if I'll ever get there, but that would be an interesting experiment to do. But I think this is I think I probably have a story somewhere out there that has actually no dialogue in it. I'm thinking of one that probably has actually no dialogue in it whatsoever.
Oh, really?
But yeah, yeah. But aside from that, I think this is the one that has the least in it. So
Yeah, it's definitely it's almost entirely introspection and so exploring Margaret's perspective on the world and
mhm.
the interactions she has with people. And
Yep.
it's I actually it's kind of nice that like these like waistband variants and nerds of standards too are sort of the two that we've talked about so far by you is like we can really get a feel for your true strength as a writer where we get like fully exposed to your ability to write dialogue and then fully exposed to your ability to write detail and description. And it's fantastic to see.
Thank you.
I
I
I
appreciate
think
that.
I think these two are sort of like companion pieces in some ways. Like they work very well off of each other. Have like a nice contrast.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a very nice compliment.
Yeah, of course. Um well, so I guess coming off of that very nice compliment, then here's very very small critique of the some of the
Sure. Let's hear
some
it.
of the paragraphs are really thick. It almost reads like block writing, but it is a
Yeah.
very small gripe.
Yeah, I probably could have formatted it a bit better, but like I said, I got really enthusiastic about this, and so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I think one of my weaknesses as a writer is I tend to want to put almost too much detail on things, like, and I do think people can do that. I think you could put so much detail that you sort of lose focus of the story, right? The details, um, I think, should be there to help enhance the story, but you don't want the details to be the story.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're writing like a whole book, in which case you have like all the time in the world to write, and you can Tolkien it and just have word, pages upon pages talking about different, sceneries. But even that's its own unique kind of writing
Which
style
is,
that I
as I
enjoy.
actually kind of, as a sidebar, funnily enough, I'm doing that right now.
No, okay. Well, in my opinion, I think some people can go too far into it. I think if
Yes.
done right, it's good. I think if done
Hmm.
right, it's good, and I'm sure yours will be great. But I got so enthusiastic about it that sometimes I would just write and write and write and write in these paragraphs, and I'd look up and I'd be like, "Wow, that's kind of a long one. Probably should start a new one." And I never thought to like break up the already existing ones. So yeah, I see what you mean by some of the
Hmm.
paragraphs being a bit longer, but yeah, I'm not too. I haven't lost any sleep over that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think the story is still extremely enjoyable and it's still very good regardless. So I guess I might not get a might not get a legitimate answer on this. But does Margaret actually enjoy being bullied? She says many times that she just doesn't want her time wasted on weak attempts, but everything else in the story tells me that she's a. This is gonna sound extremely otaku. Uh, Everything else tells me that she's a Sundere submissive.
Oh, 100%. And I've made it very well known. Okay, I've outed myself on this website already by saying that Sundirs are sort of are kind of my type. Uh,
Yeah.
I've openly admitted that. And thankfully I haven't gotten any flack for it. But yeah, so
Okay.
I totally agree. I think there's some element that's present here where she enjoys it, just doesn't necessarily want to admit to herself that
Hmm.
she enjoys it, right? And that's very typical of the Sungir archetype that you see. Um, and so I think this is like her way of keeping sort of her pride and dignity intact is this whole thing of like, oh well, I just don't want my time to be wasted on half-assed attempts. So if we're going all in, so if this is going to happen, we better make it, worth my time, right?
Yeah.
Um, that seems to me like that would be a self-defense mechanism for her to just not admit to herself that she likes being bullied.
Hmm.
But I could also see it being a thing where if you want to read it, I think I've left it in a way where if you want to read it as she doesn't like it, but she literally just is so stingent about how her time is spent, because I've met people that are so stingent about how their time is spent. Um, that this is just a way of her keeping her sanity in check, where it's like, okay, well, at least I feel like my time hasn't been wasted, right? And I included some of that in the story as well, where she says things like, her time wasn't just wasted, it was like it's outright destroyed, right?
Yes.
It was like there's literally nothing that she could have done to prevent this, so it doesn't feel like a waste in so much as she's just a victim of circumstance.
I mean,
um
whatever she has to do to help herself feel better, even though she could have easily avoided it by just not going to his house.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's like
um
her going to his apartment. That's really what's driving me towards it. Is like, yeah, she could have very easily avoided it, and in a way, she is kind of wasting her time when she could be doing something else. 'Cause, like,
Right. Exactly. That's sort of the great irony of the story is it's
yeah,
like
it's
she's
the
putting
comedy.
herself into these it's the comedy. She's putting herself into these situations that she's getting angry about, right?
Yes.
It's like I don't want my time to be wasted, but in order to make sure it's not wasted, I'm going to go to somebody who's going to waste my time even more so I don't feel bad about the people who wasted my time to begin with. And it's just yeah. It's kind of goofy. But I like it. So,
Yeah, and really, that's sort of one of the underlying pieces of your voice is that consistent through line of the like a little just that small injection of comedy. I love that. You're so consistent
well,
with
thank
it,
you. Thank you.
whether it's
I
intentional
like
or
to
not.
think, yeah, sorry, no, go ahead, finish your
No,
thought.
that's it. That's it.
Oh, okay, yeah. I appreciate that. I like to think I'm a funny person. I've been told by a couple people in real life that I'm a funny person, so I'm glad that that kind of translates over. Um, yeah, I like to laugh, and I like
Yeah,
sort of ridiculous situations that are laughable. So glad that it's coming across.
for sure. Yeah, it is. Like, and it's not the whole thing is comedy. It's just a small
Right.
portion of it. It's like I think the way you fit it in is perfect.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Now, I was. I was surprised and a little disappointed the story ended when it did.
Mm,
I want to see the rest of their session, especially since Margaret is just starting to get the bullying she's been craving. I don't want to be a
yeah,
fly on the wall for the rest of that quote unquote finally.
yeah, yeah. I think this is one of those things where I kind of talked about earlier, sort of leaving it up, being a little shithead that I am sometimes, sort of cutting it off right before we get any real resolution. Um, I think in my eyes, Margaret's already gotten her resolution, right?
Mm,
It's the situation where she's like, you know, it doesn't matter what happens from here on out because now I know, my time's not going to be wasted. Whatever
yeah.
that entails doesn't necessarily matter. So for her, I think that's why I felt a need to end the story when I did because
Mhm.
I think for her, she's gotten her resolution, right? And she kind of talks about she's gonna have to cancel these plans, and she's gonna miss this, and she's gonna have to reschedule these things because she knows she's gonna be here for a long time. But then she kind of finished it with, but that's okay, right? So
Yeah.
she's sort of all right with that. So um, I agree. I think it could be fun to kind of dive into the sessions and everything of that nature, but again, I think just the tone and kind of the idea that I had for the story, it felt right to end it there.
Yeah.
So,
And I agree. Like when you think about what this story is actually about, what it's trying to accomplish,
mhm,
yeah, it probably is the natural stopping point. Because yeah, ultimately their sessions don't really have any effect on the whole conflict of this story.
right,
Um,
right.
but perhaps a different story expanding on it would
Oh,
be
maybe
great to
you
have.
never know. Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. But I mean, despite that, I really like the overall length of it. It harkens
Yeah, I
back
did too. It
to
was
the
good.
old clunky style of writing, but it's written to a much higher degree. Like the
Well, that's good.
yeah.
Yeah, I like the length of it too. I've mentioned multiple times. I think I write too much sometimes, and so like in terms of just like straight out length.
Hmm.
And I've noticed that the shorter stories that can sort of be read through in 10 to 20 minutes typically tend to do better and are received better than sort of the longer ones that I personally enjoy reading and writing.
Hmm.
So I think I made an effort to try and make this one short. Also, just because it had been a while since I'd put something out, so I was kind of like, I kind of want to just um, make this shorter so I could put it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of just having a work in progress that sits around in my Google Drive for like or my Google Docs for like 6 months. Um, so yeah, I like the length of this one too. And ever since I wrote this one, most of the stuff that I've put out since then have been similar lengths. I've been trying to tone down the length of a lot of my stuff
Mm.
as a result. It's been kind of a fun thing. That's just been a personal choice that I've made
Yeah.
recently, and it's been good. So
Uh, I think one of the benefits of quote unquote writing too much. I don't think that ever exists. I don't think that's a problem ever. Um,
fair enough.
personally, but
Yeah, no, that's a fair
one of
point.
the positives of doing that is then you have all of this material that you can that you can choose from. Like
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
can choose the best stuff to keep in, and then remove the stuff that's not quite as good.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And like I said, I have a propensity for writing a lot, especially in a lot of my earlier stuff tended to be fairly long. Excuse me, compared to what it is now, at least. But for me, I've started working on shorter things. Like I said, it was just a personal choice because I noticed it tends to get received a little bit better.
Hmm.
Um, which is fine. That's if that's what people want to read, that's what people want to read. But it's also been an exercise for me in sort of like, I don't want to say self restraint, but it's been an interesting exercise to be like, okay, I know that if I have 10,000 words to work with, I can explain everything that I want to explain for the story. Can I do it in 5,000 words? Right?
Right.
It's been kind of an interesting exercise for me, like I said, to kind of test myself to be like, okay, how can I convey the same idea across a short story and a long story,
Hmm.
which has been cool. So I'm sure at some point I'll go back to writing longer stuff, and I'm actually working on something right now that is on the longer side. Um, but I'm enjoying it a lot. So,
Okay. Well, so I guess we have a tiny little teaser to look out for.
oh yeah, it's a fun one. I like it.
So, one thing that an assignment I had when I had a creative writing class in college that was probably my favorite assignment that I ever got because it was so different than anything I'd ever done before was doing a flash fiction story of 300 words or
Mm.
less. So
Oh wow,
maybe try something like that because like
I'm that.
I
Yeah.
talked about it a little bit like way before in a random episode. I think like it's so much harder to write something like that because
Oh yeah.
you gotta make sure there is no fat whatsoever. It can only
Right.
be
Exactly.
real substance.
Yeah, I've done things like that before, and I always suck at them. I've done things like in creative writing classes that I've taken in the past. It's been like, all right, you have 1 minute to write a poem, things
Hmm.
like that. Go, and then you can sort of like edit and fix spelling mistakes or whatever because you only have a minute to work with. But like the main idea, you can't add or take anything away, and all that stuff is like really difficult for me to do.
Hmm.
And I think it's just because I'm naturally drawn towards being a detail oriented person.
Hmm.
And when it comes to writing, I'm not very detail oriented in terms of like organization. It needs to be said. I'm kind of a hot mess over there. But in terms of like my writing, I love to dive into the details. And so um, diving into details helps me sort of settle into the groove of writing, right? And I think
Right.
there's sort of like a groove that people get into where you can like, sometimes you open up something to try and like write on it or whatever, and you just kind of stare at the blank screen, or you'll type out like two sentences and you're like, I can't really do it. And then there's other times you sit down to write and you write and you'll slam out, 5,000 words in one sitting. And maybe that's just me. But a lot of the detail oriented work it helps me get into that mood where I can slam out 5,000 words in one sitting. So all those short writing experiments, they're fun, and I understand the importance and value of doing those types of like exercises and stuff. I'm off. It needs to be stated. I'm like just a hot dog food at them. So
Well, potentially, maybe try one that's not time based, but rather word
yeah.
count based, or something like that.
Yeah, I saw a couple people do something like that on here not too long ago, where they did like 100 word story
Hmm.
challenges or something like that. That could be interesting. I might try that. I might try my hand at
Yeah, and if
that.
nothing else, it's just trying a different style of writing.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you'll find something you like, or maybe you think of an idea that, well, I can't quite make it work for this short of a uh, passage, but I'd love to. I love this idea, so I would like to expand it.
Right. Yeah. No, I could definitely see that being something that would happen. We get 98 words in. I'm like, yeah, I am going to finish this, but now I have an idea for a different story.
Yeah.
So yeah, that could definitely.
Yeah, you never know where your inspiration or motivation will come from.
Right. Right.
So now coming around to my segment, when
Oh yeah.
discussing realism in stories, would
Mhm.
you like me to describe the different Earths again, the different subgenres of realism?
Oh gosh, it's been a hot minute. There's like four of
Okay.
them, right?
Yes. So
I do remember that. Yeah. So go
out
ahead
of
and
so
rehash
out
them
of
for
these
me.
ones, which one do you believe it falls under? So we have
Okay.
realistic Earth, where Earth is normal as we live it every day. Alternate Earth, where Earth has changed to some degree, mainly focusing on wedgies.
Hmm.
Idealistic Earth, where Earth has changed to fit the desires of the wedgie community or some aspect of it, depending on the writer.
Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
fantastical Earth, where Earth has changed to be unrecognizable, like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons. Or it could be a mix of the
I'd
four, it can
say.
be all of them.
Oh, I don't think it's all of them. I think this one's probably. Um, mm, I think this one's probably a blend between the first two you described. I think it's realistic in a degree where, these are everyday people doing the everyday thing, but I don't think it's as realistic as like, you know, what was it? Like the waistband variance one where we talked about where it's like this is an isolated incident of this person.
Yep.
I don't think this is realistic in the sense that I don't think people actually get, wedgies or bullied like this as frequently as it is portrayed in media. I don't
And
think it's
especially in
ever been that
college.
way, especially in college. college, right?
Yeah.
Especially in college, you don't see stuff like that. So I don't think it's realistic in that sense. But I think it's realistic in the sense of you have a person who is in a lot of conflict with their own internal emotions, and so who does somewhat, self contradictory things in an effort to sort of sort through or satiate those emotions. That doesn't necessarily even have to be, wedgie focused. I think people do that all the time with themselves. They
Hmm.
have a feeling about something, they don't know why or how that feeling is supposed to express itself. So they sort of do these crazy wild things in an effort to make everything make sense, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a very human thing to do. I think people do that a lot. I know I've definitely done it in the past. Again, not even wedgie related, just anything. So I think in that respect, it's a realistic story. In the respect of her, getting bullied all the time at college, yeah, that's not very realistic. So I'd
Mm.
say it's a mix between the first two.
Interesting. So let me ask you this question then before I give my thought on it.
Okay.
What manga have you drifted towards? Like, is there a specific
Oh
kind that
gosh.
or genre that you like?
So I have to be open and honest and say that I still read a lot of shonen. I'm a big shonen
Hey,
guy.
so do I.
That's what got me into manga and anime to begin with. I remember the first anime I ever watched was Naruto.
Okay.
And
All right.
actually,
All
weirdly
right.
enough, well, no, 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 hear me out. Okay, hear me out first. The first one I ever watched was Naruto, and I saw it in German, which was a weird
What?
thing. I was on a family vacation when I was younger. We were in Germany for this vacation. It was super awesome. Been very fortunate to travel all my life. I will always say that. I'm very fortunate to travel. And we were in Germany, and we were staying at, like, they didn't really have Airbnbs back then, but it was kind of an Airbnb type of thing. It was like a bed and breakfast type situation. And I remember waking up one morning while we were on vacation, and I woke up before my parents and the rest of my family, and I got myself a bowl of cereal, and I turned on the TV, and it was on whatever channel they played anime on in
Hmm.
that part of Germany, and it was Naruto, and
Hmm.
it was specifically the fight where Naruto and Sasuke are fighting Haku.
Hmm.
It's like very early on, and awesome stuff, right? And so I remember I was always like drawn to that, and when I came back to the states,
Is
I like did a bunch of research and figured out that it was so.
is that the fight?
Shonen got me.
Is that the
Sorry.
fight on the bridge?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes, the
Okay.
fight on the bridge. Yeah, it's like Zabuza and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Haku,
Yeah. Yeah.
the one that everybody thought was a girl, but is actually a dude.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that got me into shonen, and I will admit, Naruto was the first anime I watched all the way through. I could tell by your exasperated sigh that you're not a fan, or maybe
For many
whether you're a
reasons.
fan or not, for many reasons.
I'm not a
It's not
fan
my
for many
favorite.
reasons.
It's not my favorite.
Yeah.
But it got me into shonen.
Okay.
And so currently I'm reading through Black Clover. Anyone who's checked out
Oh yeah.
my page knows that I love Black Clover. Black Clover is super awesome. Um, I'm reading through Jujutsu Kaisen right now as well. In terms of shonen stuff, reading
Yeah.
through um, what's the other one? Can't remember the other one. It's not as big, but I can't remember the name of it right now. But those are the two like shonen that I'm really into at this point in time.
Hmm.
But I've recently started going off into other things. So there's this one. I don't know if it's technically a manga. It's kind of a weird one. I'm not gonna lie to you, but it's called "What Happens Inside the Dungeon." If you're familiar with that.
Never heard of
Um,
it.
okay, it's Korean, not Japanese,
So
so
it's a
I don't know if it even
manhwa.
counts. There you go, manhwa. That's what it is.
Yeah, one of my
Um,
favorites in that style is a manhwa.
Oh, very good, very good. And it is, and I believe they're called an ecchi. Is that the one where it's
Yes.
like borderline
Yep.
stuff? Yes,
Yep.
it
That's my
starts
favorite.
that way. Okay, yeah. So you might have to check that one out because
Okay.
it's called "What Happens Inside the Dungeon." It starts out really weird, and like it's like if you like the ichi style or the ecchi style or whatever, then you'll probably won't have an issue with it. It was the first one I'd ever read, and so I was like, What am I reading here?" But it was one of those things where unironically you start it for the etchy stuff, but then you stay for the story because the story is
Hmm.
really good, and
That's.
the action in it's also very very good. So yeah,
I mean,
I just finished that one not too
that's
long ago.
that's what happened to me with so many of those series. Like, it's
Oh
pretty
yeah,
hot, but then like these characters, the story grabs you
really good.
so heavily, and like, oh, so great.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So, see, I can't remember why I brought that up now.
Got you
But
so miffed
some,
about Naruto that you can't even remember what you're gonna ask
I
me about.
wonder,
So,
I wonder if your early experience to the German version of Naruto influenced your enjoyment of foreign music.
oh yeah, dude, I love foreign music so much. Um, love that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I don't listen to a lot of German music. Ironically enough, most of the music I listen to that's foreign is like French and Belgian music. Um, love that stuff. That stuff goes so hard. Um, but
Okay.
yeah.
Nice. Um,
hmm
I think I kind of remember it. I wonder if your, I guess, expanded taste on manga
hmm
is reflected here of that it's sort of a trope in the ecchi or harem manga, just like shonen, where there's some romance. So like
hmm
people, like especially female leads, most of the time, where like the guys are usually oblivious, and the where
Oh
the
yeah,
female leads are sort of trying to come up with any excuse besides "I feel this way. I actually enjoy
yeah,
this."
yeah.
Um,
Definitely. I think the biggest example that I look to is yet again I'm going to call it out Black Clover.
mhm,
Awesome stuff if people haven't read it here. But the main character is very much like that. There's sort of the main female lead who is just absolutely head over heels for this guy, and he's just sort of a himbo who has no
mhm.
idea how she feels about
Of course,
it. And it very tried and true trope.
but it's
But it
great
was the
all the
first
same.
time. Oh yeah, it's great all the time. But it's tried and true, and we like that.
Yes.
And so that definitely inspired me with a lot of the newer stuff that I've been writing. I've been leaning kind of more heavily into sort of the not necessarily oblivious guy, but the guy who's maybe not as observant. Because
Mhm.
I don't want to get into the whole space where like guy's an idiot and doesn't understand anything. Like that's
Right.
to me, I think that works in like I think that stereotype works for a manga or something more long-winded, but for like an isolated story, I don't want to just have like kind of a flat character like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So so I've been trying to lean more into the guy is either ignorant or maybe he's not as observant or maybe he's got something else going on that keeps him from seeing how the girl feels about him.
Mhm.
Or it keeps him from seeing how the girl feels about the situation in the example of this story, Nerds Have Standards too, where Ian, and again, we don't see exactly what he thinks about it, but I think it's implied that he may not have the full picture the way that she does.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's definitely inspired a lot of my newer writings that I've been doing. I've been leaning a lot more into that because it's fun and I like it. So,
For sure. Yeah, and
mhm.
so my thought on which one it is I think it's idealistic.
Okay,
I could maybe see realistic if it was just Margaret and Ian participating in bullying tactics, because the only
right,
ones shown between them are in a private location.
right,
But in my mind, the idea really is too idealistic for us fetishists to be
okay,
anything but that one. I
sure.
especially like I think almost any male in this community would metaphorically die to have a Margaret in their life.
Yeah, I I see where you're coming from, and I'd be willing to change my answer to that. I think now
Yeah.
that you put it that way, yeah, I definitely agree. So,
At least it's my ideal. I'll put it
yeah,
that way.
no, I think it's everyone's ideal. I don't know who in this community would, have a Margaret standing around and they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, this is just the worst." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think any of us in this
Yeah.
community would be like, yeah, 100%. Come on over whenever you want." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Wake me up in the middle of the night.
you literally don't does not matter anywhere
Yeah.
you need. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But it's also
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
I like having this split. It doesn't have to be one definitive thing. It's like because
Sure. No,
there's
definitely
absolutely
understandable.
aspects of it that fit all three of them.
Yeah. Definitely.
Now, should we keep an eye out for more about these two characters? Please say yes.
um well, you say that. I mean, truth be told, I haven't thought of anything else for them. I know that's probably heartbreaking to hear. I haven't thought of anything else. I'm not going to write it off. I think I don't try and write anything off as a potential story. I
Hmm.
think there's very few things that I will like hardline say, no, I'm never going to write
Yeah.
about. Very, very few things. And I think that's just, artists understanding what their limits are. Um, I don't think artists should have this attitude of like, oh, well, I've never done that before, so I don't want to do it. I think part of,
Hmm.
being an artist is taking chances and exploring new mediums once you get more comfortable, or maybe new modes of that medium. You know what I mean? Once you get more comfortable. Um, and so obviously, styles will change. You'll start
Hmm.
exploring settings or stories or relationship dynamics you haven't explored before. I think that's fine. Um, but I know myself well enough to know that I'm like never gonna write X type of stuff. Right. That being said, X type of stuff is a very short list, and so these characters, obviously, people enjoyed them a lot. Might see more with them. It's not on my radar at the moment. I only really
Hmm.
have one or two things on my radar though, so maybe they'll come back around.
Hmm.
I have that story that I'm working on. Like I said, it's a little bit of a
Right.
longer one. And then there's one other thing that I'm going to be working on, and after that, I don't have any other stories planned. So who knows?
Okay.
Maybe we'll come back.
Well, I did have an idea for a sequel to
Pitch
this
it.
that
Go for it.
but you probably have to lean more into Margaret actually enjoying this to some degree,
Okay.
um, where she finds someone who does it better than Ian. But the conflict is that she wants
Ooh.
she kind of doesn't want to break up with him in a sense, like you break
Uh
up with your
huh.
plumber,
Yeah.
like things like that, like
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah.
things like so she has to try and figure out how to either balance it or stop interacting with Ian, or to like choose
That's a good
choose one or
idea.
the other, like without hurting the other person's feelings.
I like that. That's a pretty good one.
All right.
Um. Yeah. I think that'd be fun. You can get a lot of the obviously, like you said, kind of the conflict that she feels, like she's breaking up with her bully or whatever, like you said, where it's like, breaking up with your plumber or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's always is something that people get a good kick out of and is relatable. But then you could also get, I think there's good opportunities for a lot of um, to what am I trying to say? There's a lot of opportunity to explore it from Ian's side as well. How does he
Mm-hmm.
react whenever she stops coming around to him as often? And then how does he react when he finds out that there's this other person?
Yeah.
I That's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea at all.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write
And
that one down.
hey, I like to hear that. That's good.
Where that's definitely getting written down. So,
Awesome.
oh
And yeah, maybe you change the idea around to be something different. But yeah, that's
sure, yeah,
and then
no.
if you decide to go with it, then you'd be bringing it to what Hans calls the magic number of perspectives of three.
Oh yeah, which is
Oh,
what
it's
is the yeah?
oh
Sorry.
like three perspectives.
Oh, three perspectives. Okay, very good, very
Yeah. Is there
good.
anything else that you'd like to discuss?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, unless we want to go into like another hour long rant that I did last time about art in the community in general, I think um, I'm I'm good. I think.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
Thanks for having me on again. Appreciate it.
absolutely, absolutely, and
Um,
we'll have to do an episode on that then.
yeah, no, definitely. Any other manga recommendations or anime? Do you watch anime at all, or is it just are you more of a
Uh,
manga reader?
I've watched some anime, but it's I don't like. Okay, Cowboy Bebop. That's pretty much the only anime I
That's a great one.
recommend.
Great one.
It's
Yeah, that's a great one.
the simply put, it's the best storytelling I've ever seen ever. Of the thousands of works that I've read.
Oh yeah, Cowboy Bebop's pretty solid. I like that one a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, manga. Let's see here. I'm looking at my actual collection, my library right now. Um, Unbalance X Unbalance if you enjoy ecchi. Like the story's
Okay,
beautiful in it as well. It's like 82 chapters, so it's not super long.
that's not bad
And
at all.
the greatest the greatest crime in all of manga to me is that there were only ever two of the 10 volumes that were released in English officially before the
Mm,
company that had the rights shut down, and it's never been done again.
dang.
It kills me. I don't think I'm ever going to
Yeah.
get a full release of it. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, Nana and Kaoru especially. That's the one. That's the
Okay.
one that such a great. And there's
It's the
there's
one you'll
three
recommend to everyone.
there's there's the original, and then there's um Black Label, and then there's
Okay.
Last Year. So those three series sort of together make the full story of the relationship between the two characters.
All right. Noted.
Yeah, there is an English version being released for the original series right now. The company might do the other two, but if you read those, you'll have to read them online on like fan translations and whatnot. But anyway, is there
Yeah.
anything that you'd like to promote from yourself or others?
Oh man. Obviously, read this guy's stuff. He's got some pretty good stuff. Um, listen to the podcast. I'm just
Yeah.
plugging you right now. Trying to think. I've I'm thinking of this story that I have, this kind of longer one that I'm working on right now. I see it potentially becoming a series, depending on how well it
Hmm.
does. So maybe look out for that. The world that I'm creating for the story has potential to become a series. That's what I'm trying to get
Okay.
at. So,
So sort of like an
who knows?
anthology.
Not an anthology, but it's just
Okay.
I am. It's yeah. I wouldn't call it an anthology, but there's definitely I'm creating the story. How do I say this? The story involves the characters are in a situation where there's sort of, there's potential for multiple stories to happen. I think that's just the
Okay.
easiest way I can say that without leaving any
Yeah.
sort of um, spoilers. It will be the same people. It's not going to be like an episodic
Okay.
thing, but could see something there. Um, Other than that, not really. I mean, just everybody have fun, keep writing. I'm really bad at like this plug and everything.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's all that I have to say. So
All right. Very nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Enigmatic.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Of course. And you're gonna have to come on soon again.
Yes, I'll try to make it back in maybe like 15 episodes this time instead of 30 for the next go around. So
Yeah, I mean, if you cut in half every time, soon it'll be
yeah,
every episode that you're on.
every other episode. Yeah, that's
uh,
right.
wow. Now, if there's anything that you listeners would like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as New Fatora. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.